We're good to go. Good morning, first of all, and welcome to the second in this series that we are co-hosting with ACFID. I am Julie Rosenberg, and I'm the Executive Director of the Australian International Development Network, otherwise known as AIDN. I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we are beaming in to you from, and pay my respects to elders present, past, and emerging. I think we're all aware now that the sector is grappling with the constant ripple effect of the massive cuts to development aid funding that happened earlier this year through the US and actually all around the globe. Luckily, Australia's holding sort of out and maintaining its commitment to its development funding. We're hoping that actually remains the case, and it would be even great if we actually stepped up. We agreed to co-host this series with ACFID because there were lots of people going, well, what now, what next? How are we all going to step up? The need has not got any smaller as a consequence of the cuts. The need remains as great, if not bigger. And there's now a great big gaping hole that kind of needs to be filled. So we're going to listen to 5 organisations, I think, today that all have opportunities, all have work that is urgent and in need of funding. I'm going to hand over now to ACFID CEO, Matthew Morey, and he's going to introduce each of the panel that we have speaking to you today. If you use the chat function and throw in all the questions that you've got, we will direct them to either the panel or individual speakers. Any comments at all are welcome. As you know, this session's being recorded, and yeah, you'll hear more from us at the end of the series. Okay, Matthew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julie, and welcome to everybody. Good to have you here. As Julie mentioned, the series is being recorded. This is the second of our 4-week series connecting Australian philanthropy to the needs created, as Julie mentioned, because of the big shifts. And I think what's important about noting that it is being recorded is the fact that it's not just the people who are attending today. Like, this was going to continue to be shared after the event to the wider AIDN network, so people can watch it at a time that's convenient to them. Today, our series is focusing on humanitarian gaps and disaster response programs that have been impacted by the shifts in aid. And we have 5 different speakers from ACFID members who are going to be sharing about specific programming. ACFID is the peak body for the Australian International Development and Humanitarian Organizations. This slide has a mosaic of the logos, which you'll never be able to read, but it does capture the breadth of membership that we have. And just in the presentations today, you're going to get a sense of that as well. I did want to paint the picture a little bit on the context that we're in at the moment. Certainly we know, and the USAID cuts have gotten a lot of publicity, but the reality is the global overseas development assistance budget for many countries is being reduced over the coming years. In fact, we're seeing one of the biggest reductions that we've ever seen in the history of aid over the coming years, where you can see the decline from USAID, from the UK, from other European donors. So it's a significant drop across the overall spectrum. And the next slide shows you the specific survey results that we got as we spoke to ACFID members about the impact on our sector. I won't repeat all the numbers you can see on the slide, but I will say that, as you can see, $400 million worth of programming has been impacted just because of the USAID cuts. And you can multiply that out as we look at those other reductions that we foreshadowed on the slide before. And over $110 million in humanitarian projects particularly. So today we're focusing on a subset of those humanitarian needs. The next slide gets a little bit more into the detail about the focus, and you can see just this map that comes from Humanitarian Action, which the bubbles show you where some of the bigger humanitarian needs are today. The presentations will speak to a few of those big circles, but I think it's worth noting that this past year has seen more humanitarian challenges than we've seen in the last 100 years. So whilst we are making gains in some development areas, there are some big humanitarian challenges and needs and we'll be talking about those today. The next slide, again, paints a bit of the picture, a little hard to see the graph, but that dark blue, or the big blue piece of the pie, is the US government funding, which, as the text says, is about over a third of the overall humanitarian expenditure, and thus the really significant magnitude of the impacts of the cuts that USAID has made to so many of these programs. I won't read each of these boxes either. You'll have a chance to see these presentations after the event. We're going to be sharing around resources, including these slides, but you can see the collection of different programs that have been impacted most significantly by the cuts. And finally, I wanted to show this slide, which for our members shows from our survey results where some of the greater humanitarian reductions and impacts have been felt across the Pacific, Africa, Southeast Asia. So you can see the line is the total value of the impacted projects, and the bars, the graphs, show the number of projects that are impacted for ACFID members. As I said, we're really pleased that we have 5 of our members today who are going to be sharing about their specific work. They have about 7 minutes each, and we're going to be legalistic about the time so that everybody has a chance to share. And the great opportunity at the end is some chance for questions and discussion as well. And I welcome not just the people who are attending and listening, but also the presenters to ask questions and contribute to the discussion. Our first focus is going to be a couple of projects that are from Myanmar, which is actually the biggest humanitarian crisis in our region, kind of in our locale. So I'm going to first ask Nicole from Caritas to talk about the programming they have and the needs they're seeing. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Matthew, and very mindful of my 7 minutes, but I did just want to take 10 seconds or so just to say thank you. This is a wonderful initiative, and thank you for all showing up and giving us the opportunity to tell you about these programs. So I will very, very quickly share screen. It's certainly not death by PowerPoint. It's just nice and quick. But can everyone see that okay? Matthew, I can see you. If you can just nod, great, wonderful. So I thought I might just commence by very quickly giving a very short intro into who Caritas Australia is, for those of you who don't know. But who we are, Caritas Australia has been operating in Australia for 60 years. We are a long-term development program, and we work in the humanitarian sector as well. So this past year, we've responded to 30 different emergencies and supported 57 programs across 36 different countries, including some here in Australia. We are part of a large global network. It's a Caritas Internationalis network. It's one of the largest humanitarian networks in the world, and it supports emergency aid and grassroots programs in over 200 countries and territories. Obviously, a focus here on humanitarian in the discussion today, but just to name a few of the responses that we are active in at the moment is Myanmar, Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Somalia, Vanuatu, DRC, and Papua New Guinea, still supporting there after their landslide. So, of course, though, we're here to speak about Myanmar, a huge earthquake in March, but really the issue is that Myanmar was already a country in crisis. It had 3.5 million people already displaced, nearly 20 million needing humanitarian assistance. So to say that the earthquake was catastrophic is potentially an understatement. There was widespread destruction of homes, of critical infrastructure, roads, bridges, public buildings like hospitals and schools, and there is an ongoing need, an ongoing immediate, we would still call it, need for water, food, shelter, sanitation, medicines, healthcare, and critically the monsoon season looms. In fact, it's pretty much here with them now. So what our response is in particular, we work with Caritas Myanmar. Caritas Myanmar are looking, well, their program that they're rolling out at the moment supports just under 50,000 beneficiaries. They're from villages in and around the epicentre. They're in Mandalay, so they're the most impacted. As I said, immediately what they're working with now are the basics: food, water, shelter, protection and income generating activities. And these people were already struggling. And now they've lost their homes, their livelihoods. Many are sleeping in the streets. They're without their medicines. They're struggling to get enough food to sustain their families. And as I said, the monsoon season is upon them. Moving from those sorts of immediate needs, our partner Caritas Myanmar is really transitioning into some transitional needs. So clean water points. They're providing cash assistance to families so that they're able to rehabilitate their homes and get their lives back to normal, return to some form of normality. They're working with the community for the market systems to get the markets back up and running so that, people are able to shop and get back to a normality and get their basic needs in a normal way. As well as healthcare restoration, medicines, people need tests, people need treatments, etc., making sure that these are available, and psychosocial support, because again, these people have already been living through terrible conflict, and now with this, they're very frightened and very scared. A little bit about our particular partner, Caritas Myanmar. They've been in Myanmar and serving vulnerable and displaced people in Myanmar. And the initiative that they have was supported by the US government. So the funding has now been terminated, and it's really left these tens of thousands of people, wide open. These are the same people who are now impacted by the earthquake. So our partner Caritas Myanmar was already working in these areas. Then the earthquake hit, and of course, the need now has never been greater. There's a massive surge of new funding required. But really, the opportunity lies with private donors to support the gaps that are in funding at the moment. Caritas Myanmar has been active in Myanmar for many, many decades. It's well known in the area, and it's well known with local authorities. It's got the trust of the people and experience in working in what is an incredibly complex environment. It's one of, not the only, and I know I've got another colleague about to speak soon, but one of the only active local humanitarian support providers that is able to work in the region, particularly those regions that are in the conflict zones. They're one of the largest, they were one of the largest recipients of USAID in Myanmar, and they're a trusted UN partner and are rolling out UN programs at the moment too. This specific, just some images there while I talk to the actual funding, but this specific program is a 12-month plan. It is already underway. It finishes in March next year, and there is a $3 million funding shortfall at the moment, which the Caritas network is trying to fill, but we also do need to look at private donors to help fill this shortfall so that Caritas Myanmar, who has the capacity to surge and is there and able to perform the works, is able to absorb the funding and actually continue to roll out and achieve what has been said in this presentation, so that they don't need to cut back on activities or the levels and numbers of people that they're able to support. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm not sure where I'm at with my 7 minutes, but it's a very worthwhile program and in a desperate supply of making up its funding shortfall. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Actually, perfect timing, so appreciate that. And we are going to stay with Myanmar, and I'm asking Guillermo from ChildFund to speak next.
Thank you, Matthew. Give me a second. Let me know when you can see my screen, please.
Yeah, we can see it.
Amazing. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. Very thankful with AIDN and ACFID for the space. My name is Guillermo Lozano. You can call me G, or you can call me Leo. And I work for the philanthropy team in ChildFund Australia. As some of you might know, ChildFund is like humanitarian aid organization working to reduce the poverty for children and young people in different countries. And in our case in Myanmar, we are just like Caritas, we are not new. We've been working in Myanmar since 2012, working with 3 local partners in 4 different regions, including, of course, Mandalay, which is part of this conversation today. And we understand the complex challenges ongoing in Myanmar as well. Because if I see back on time, years ago, 15 years ago, probably, I was in Haiti at that time, working in earthquake responses and humanitarian aid. The way the humanitarian sector started looking at the emergencies was like responding to events, right? Single events happening all across the world. And I think something that Matthew mentioned before in the start of the conversation was the fact that the challenges of the sector are increasing. And part of those challenges is because we are addressing complex emergencies at the moment, multiple phase emergencies, multiple events happening everywhere, all at once. So the fact that Myanmar is a great example for that, having a 2021 military coup that has widespread violence, armed conflict, and severe human rights abuses, sanctions that have economic impacts, of course, in the population, having the prices of food and fuel increase, and of course, this has an impact in the cost of living for families, for thousands of families. We have communities that have been devastated by climate events like floods and cyclones. And of course, what happens in schools and the disruption to schools, right? And we in ChildFund, we're very focused in schools, not because the school itself, but what happens around the schools. We understand that all the systems that are involved in schools are about protection, and about health, are about recovery, and having safe spaces for children. So this is the picture. And when we thought things would not get worse, we have 2025. And with this disruption that we've been already talking about, the foreign aid freeze from US had an extreme impact in the programming in the field. It's at least 50% of the budget, but it's not a conversation about budget. It's a conversation about health services. It's a conversation about education. It's a conversation about having the tools in the ground to help families. So the implications for Myanmar were already complex. That foreign aid cut was even worse, make everything worse. And then in March, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake, multiple earthquakes actually, that not just killed 4,000 people, but destroyed critical infrastructure and make everything really worse. Really, really bad. So as humanitarians, we understand one thing, and my colleague Nicole already talked about that, the complexity of the solution, the complexity of the situation demands complex solutions, right? And we in ChildFund believe in that. So we have a response plan that is ongoing at the moment. We're passing the 2-month mark in which we guarantee survival. That was our first goal, guarantee survival of the people, 16,000 people in the ground with food items, water, sanitation, shelter materials, hygiene kits to guarantee survival. We are now transitioning to early recovery, in which we want to guarantee that people starts, or at least having the horizon, a way to go back to normal, whatever that means at the moment, right? So we are working in temporary safe spaces for children, in which they receive psychosocial and education support, learning materials, families receiving food baskets. And this phase will last 4 months, and we will cover the same people we covered in the first one. But the third one is the one in which I want to put an emphasis, because I think we, as a sector, we need to understand that the future needs to see and think about the long game. And in the long game, we want to renovate 20 schools. Again, it's not infrastructure, it's the services that the schools provide for the communities, and provide, in the meantime, non-formal education to children, provide safe spaces for them to be in the meantime, the parents are busy with other activities, deliver, again, hygiene kits, because of course, we understand that the health services have been disrupted at the moment. And at the same time, keep going with our vocational training programs with young people, because we understand that part of the economic recovery will come from empowerment, will come from training, will come from vocational work. So we're trying to reach 24,000 people with this one. And the funding gap we have is at the moment 250,000 for this last component of resilience, in which we really need help to find partners that can co-invest with us, in which we will have safe spaces, as I mentioned, rebuild schools. I mean, 250,000 will not recover 20 schools, but it's a co-investment, as I mentioned, that we're doing with different partners. And of course, we believe that dynamizing the economy, bringing the economy back on track is playing the long game. So this is what we're doing. I'm sure this is something you might be interested in. This is my contact details. Let's give me a call, say hi, let's grab a coffee. I can tell you a lot of good stories. There's a lot of good stories happening as well. And I can tell you a lot of the good stories that are happening in the field that I'm sure all my colleagues are facing at the moment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Guillermo, and Nicole as well, for telling about both the needs in Myanmar as well as the different ways that your organizations are responding. So thank you for that. We are going to shift gears and hear a bit about some of the needs in Afghanistan. And I'm going to ask Carol from ActionAid to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I'm going to share with you, I'll keep within the time, but share with you highlights from Afghanistan and Bangladesh, because both our colleagues have been talking to us and we feel that it's important to share two contexts. Also recognizing that ActionAid works in partnership with ActionAid Bangladesh and ActionAid Afghanistan. And we have seen their journey on how the work that we have enabled them to implement through Australian funding has led them to facilitate women, peace and security in their very difficult context, but also driving, food security and ending poverty. But this has changed since the funding cuts. And just maybe the next slide. That you may all be aware that half of the population of Afghanistan, 23 million people, currently require humanitarian assistance to survive hunger, with 14.8 million facing acute food security and malnutrition. And when we talk to the women in Afghanistan or our colleagues in Afghanistan, they say that this is a major, major issue that women have to directly face to see how best to support their community. From what we gather also, the USAID funding cuts have impacted ActionAid Afghanistan's food security and nutrition programs that were reaching more than 100,000 people in 143 villages across 4 provinces. And these programs were supporting women farmers, and they were our entry points to be able to engage and work closely with the women in Afghanistan, which in the last few years has been difficult, and also facilitate them to have a voice, to be able to communicate the other issues that they were experiencing. So according to the information that we have, sorry, I cannot see, I don't know what is it. According to the information we have, there is a shortfall of 4.6 million funding over the next 3 years because these projects were directly US funding. Next slide, please. So the impact of this to our work means we need 32,000 AUD that will enable immediate food relief to just 1 village and investment in agriculture to support longer-term food security. 70,000 would go to supporting livelihood recovery, focusing mainly on women farmers in just 1 province to increase their recognition as farmers, contribution to the household income, and participating through the farmer field schools, agricultural inputs training, business development, and improved market access. 100,000 would therefore increase access to water for agriculture and domestic use, as you may well know, through water, food security, the protection issues for women are also addressed. Agriculture for us remains a key entry point to women's participation, just so that we don't do harm, but also getting their voice to contribute to the peace and security and coping mechanisms within their country. The next one. and go straight to Bangladesh. So Bangladesh, sorry, just 1 minute, I have to move my screen in a certain way. So over 1 million young Rohingya refugees live in the 33 densely populated camps in Cox's Bazar and Bhashan Char in Bangladesh, with 100,000 arrivals over 2025. This is the data we have from our colleagues. And ActionAid provides comprehensive support in 24 camps, including food security, water, sanitation, hygiene, shelter and protection, to basically reaching to 739,673 people. US aid cuts have resulted in 20% reduction of this funding over the next year, which is 2.2 million Australian dollars. This threatens the closure of the one-stop crisis center, providing gender-based violence protection and sexual reproductive health services in the 3 camps. And when I was interacting with my colleagues and, during monitoring visits and monitoring discussions, the one-stop crisis center meant so much for these women, and they felt and described it as their safe place. Next slide, please. So 400,000 AUD will support a one-stop crisis center in 1 camp to provide protection of women's rights, including sexual and reproductive health rights, preventing and responding to violence against women. And the approach we use in this programming is a women-led, community-based protection approach that allows them to drive their own protection agenda. 100,000 AUD will provide water, sanitation, and hygiene support. Water also continues to pop up as a key protection issue for women. When they go out of their safe spaces to look for it, their safety and security is compromised. So 2.2 million AUD will provide comprehensive support across 24 camps rather than just saving lives, reaching over 700,000 refugees. So that's where we are. We are committed to seeing how best we can facilitate their funding, but ActionAid approach remains focusing and putting energy around women's leadership and collective agency to work on the crisis, but also to build their recovery resilience programs and also focusing on protection. I'll leave it at there. We would just wanted to make it brief. And so if there are any questions, then we would address those.
That's great. Thanks, Carol. We'll take questions at the end. So please do, if you have questions, either put them into the chat and we'll get to those, or feel free to hold them and you can ask them at the end. I'll also just reiterate that we will be sharing these presentations after the webinar with everyone who's attended and make them available more widely to the AIDN network. So thanks for that. We are going to move to a different part of the world and hear about some of the needs in Africa. And Michael Stoltz from Australian Lutheran World Service will be talking about some more needs there in Kenya. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And also thanks, Julie, for setting up this forum. It's appreciated to have this opportunity. My name is Michael Stoltz, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of Australian Lutheran World Service. I do have some slides, and I'll just share.
Great, we can see those.
Okay, thank you. So ALWS began 75 years ago, helping refugees displaced by World War II find a new life here in Australia. And today that legacy lives on as we support displaced people and refugees around the world, currently in 14 countries, including Myanmar, and also including in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps in Kenya. And I'm here today because I believe that together with you, we can help protect the futures of children who've already lost so much. So I've just clicked to the next slide. Hopefully you can see that. So after this session, like most of you, I'm going to have lunch. Maybe a salad wrap or a sandwich, maybe even something warm and comforting. But if I were a father in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, a lunch would be different. Just 40 grams of maize porridge. That's less than a handful, no salt, no flavour. And that's all there is for breakfast, lunch, dinner, day after day. But there's the thing, I'm a father. So I'd skip the meagre lunch and give it to my child. Because hunger is terrible and watching your child go hungry is worse. There is the cruel reality for hundreds of thousands of families in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps where food has been slashed in half and where the ripple effect is devastating not only for stomachs, but for futures. Kakuma and Dadaab are two of the largest refugee camps in the world. Kakuma is home to over 270,000 refugees from various countries, including South Sudan and Somalia. Dadaab currently hosts more than 330,000 refugees, mainly from Somalia. Together, that's over 600,000 people, most of them women and children, living with uncertainty, loss, and immense need. Now, since the 1990s, our international partner, the Lutheran World Federation, LWF, has been managing these camps and has been providing educational services. They have built a trusted, effective, and deeply embedded presence. And ALWS is very proud to support that work. In fact, we've been helping people fleeing from war and persecution for 75 years. And today that mission continues. Refugees from Europe in the 1940s, refugees from South Sudan and Somalia today. Always the same commitment to restore dignity, opportunity, and hope. But now a new challenge. The US government recently halved its humanitarian aid in Kenya, and that's also being compounded by a 40% reduction from UNHCR. The consequences are staggering. Food rations down to 40 grams of maize per meal. Children going to school hungry and struggling to stay awake. Class sizes of 150 students, 4 children squeezed onto each bench, barely enough to go around. Teachers, many refugees themselves, receiving a few dollars a day, and even this is at risk. Girls facing increased threats of sexual violence if schools close. Children with disabilities pushed even further to the margins. And the long-term cost? An entire generation deprived of education, the one tool proven to break the cycle of poverty and trauma. There are 106,514 refugee children whose futures now hang in the balance. Among them, 4,575 children with disabilities. In the past few months alone, 35 staff have already lost their jobs due to these cuts. They are not just numbers on a payroll. These are teachers, support workers, community protectors. Their loss has dramatically reduced the ability to provide both food and essential services. Without school, children lose more than knowledge. They lose stability. They lose safety. They lose the one place where a future might still be possible. So ALWS, in partnership with LWF, is acting now to pay and retain teachers so school can remain open, support girls to stay in school where they are safer and more empowered, including making sure children with disabilities are given equal access to learning, protecting the classrooms from collapse as international aid recedes. But we can't do it alone. To meet the immediate need, we're seeking to raise $250,000. Every dollar matters. Every dollar protects a teacher's job, keeps a child in school, offers a path forward in a place where almost everything else has been taken away. So here's my ask, not just a gift, but for a partnership. Stand with us, help us keep education alive in Kakuma and Dadaab, help us give students 2 meals a day. Maybe today, like me, you'll skip lunch, because for some children, skipping lunch is normal, but skipping school doesn't have to be. Together we can feed minds, not just bodies. We can give children who've lost everything something no one can take away, and that's education. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to share this work that we're doing and to offer you the opportunity to partner with us.
Thanks very much, Michael. The final presentation that we have actually today is from Luke from Caritas Australia, who's going to talk about some resilience building work a little closer to Australia in the region. So Luke, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And yeah, thank you to both ACFID and AIDN for the opportunity to present today. I will just share my screen. And I hope that everyone can see that.
Yep.
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, my name is Luke Gracie. I'm the head of Humanitarian for Caritas Australia. And I wanted just to provide a little bit of an introduction and summary of what CARE is and who we are. Similar to ALWS, CARE also started in 1945 following World War II as an organization sending care packages to those impacted by the Second World War. So in that sense, humanitarian operations is really at the core, the root and the history of what CARE does. In terms of our humanitarian mandate, we are a dual mandate organization operating in development and humanitarian operations. And our goal is by 2030 to reach 50 million individuals in humanitarian emergencies, or 10% of those affected by major crises. Just as a broad overview of who we are and what we do, in FY24, CARE reached nearly 21.8 million people directly through humanitarian response across 63 countries across our entire confederation. The core sectors in which we work in humanitarian operations are shelter, wash, education, preventing and responding to gender-based violence, food security, health, livelihoods, and material assistance. It's quite a broad spectrum, but within all of those activities and services, it's gender and emergencies and gender equality that is the cut through and defining focus of CARE's operations. Women in humanitarian operations, women and girls are disproportionately impacted. Women, particularly in Asia Pacific, women are 14 times more likely to die in natural disasters. The risks in instances and situations of gender-based violence dramatically increase after a crisis as law and order may break down, normal societal systems break down, communications break down, etc. Particularly in protracted crises, malnutrition increases amongst women as women will eat last and eat less. We also have the pre-existing barriers to education, employment, independence, whatnot, that is then exacerbated by the emergency itself. Just to provide an overview of some of the impact of the USAID cuts, as my colleagues from other organizations have outlined, they have been dramatic. So globally, approximately half of CARE's 71 USAID grants have since been terminated. There's a long list there, but just as examples of projects that have been forced to stop include health programming in Afghanistan, agriculture in Ethiopia, disaster preparedness in Nepal, a country impacted at risk of earthquakes significantly. Shelter in Bangladesh, education in Somalia, closer to home, disaster preparedness in Papua New Guinea, a program operating for flood, earthquake, and cyclone preparedness in the Highlands has been forced to shut. I think importantly also is a point to highlight is in regards to the executive orders from the White House also include cessation or reduction of activities within the diversity, equity, and inclusion framework, or how that's interpreted. So that has meant that with US funds, we are unable to deliver gender equality, disability, social inclusion programming, gender modules, also programming that specifically targets or works solely with LGBTIQI plus participants, diversity awareness raising, and these sorts of programming as well. So it's beyond the programs themselves that have had to cease. I just wanted to speak quite quickly about one particular project, which is quite close in our region that has been forced to close down, is a community-based disaster risk management program. This was a regional program and was actually just about to start its third phase after 2 successful phases previously. The program operated in Samoa, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Tonga, and the plan in the next phase was to move into 2 new Pacific Island nations. The budget for this program is 6 million AUD over 3.5 years. But that $6 million figure is actually quite scalable in the sense that it's 6 countries working through 7 local partners over 3.5 years. So there is a modular scalability within that budget. This disaster risk management program would impact 50,000 people across these Pacific Island nations, which is quite a significant figure given the small populations of Pacific Islands. It would specifically focus and target women and girls and people with disability and other vulnerable groups on climate smart agriculture, strengthening community organizations, and keeping that gender and disability focus. Examples here in this program in Samoa, working with small plot farmers around having disaster resistant crops and disaster preparedness activities through the local government mechanisms. Similarly in Samoa, working with the National Organization for People with Disability, ensuring that the voices of people with disability are embedded into government response systems and actually have a voice at the table and are part of the response themselves. So funding to this program would enable the program to continue these 6 island nations to be better prepared for disasters, build stronger preparedness systems at the national and subnational levels, and strengthen long-term resilience of the Pacific Island nations who are facing increased risks through the impacts of climate change. So Matthew, I will just finish there, and I hope I was moderately on time, but thank you.
Yeah, actually perfect. Thanks very much, Luke. And I know there have been a few questions that have been entered in. I'm going to hand over to Julie to facilitate a little space for discussion.
Quite sobering discussion. One of the first questions that have come up is there a hub at all that actually helps, like we heard early on about Myanmar and the different responses? Is there anything like Emergency Action Alliance that sort of, an Emergency Action Alliance isn't a great example, but is there a humanitarian aid hub that helps coordinate responses on the ground at all?
I'm happy to make a stab, and then please jump in. Not a hub per se. So yeah, so with Emergency Action Alliance, they will fund the money out again to Caritas, ChildFund, etc.
Yep.
What I would say, and I'm happy for anyone to support here, is that on the ground, be it in Myanmar or wherever it may be, they're not falling over each other. We're not falling over ChildFund. We're not sort of fighting to get to. There's very much a working together process. There's different areas that, and you can even tell with the Myanmar ones, there's different areas where Caritas Myanmar has expertise that ChildFund doesn't, and ChildFund has expertise where we don't. And very much what we find is that it's about working together. I don't know if there's a hub, please like jump in and let me know, but I think it's more specific to the individual areas, and particularly in places like Myanmar, where aid has been a critical part of their lives, their community, their way of working for a very long time now. It is there is a solidarity and there is a working together in terms of what's done on the ground. Did you have anything to add, Guillermo?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Just to complement, there's also other mechanisms like work in some places depending the context, like OCHA, for example, which is like the UN agency that for coordination hub. It's a coordination hub for emergency response, and it divides in different clusters, right? So you have the cluster for organizations working in education, organizations working in health, organizations working in livelihood recovery. So that mechanism allows organizations to have a better coordination in the ground, so they don't have like multiple efforts in the same place, and they have a better allocation of funding, because we have limited funding. So we need to be very efficient with the way we administrate the scope of the work and also the funding targets that we have. So I think it's like a very good coordination mechanism, just in addition to what Nicole mentioned.
So no savings there. I was thinking there could be, you know, if there was any falling over each other, you know, it may help to collaborate and work together. But interesting, thank you for that. Another question I think I'd like to explore, and I would direct it to Carol only because you gave a specific example that stuck out, but then we heard quite a few others. But how do you approach making the heartbreaking decision to cut funding to various different programs? You talked about the one Stop Gender-Based Violence hubs, and I'm sure they are just vital to anyone experiencing sexual violence. How do you make that decision?
Yeah. First of all, when, you know, the announcements came through, it was not easy. Staff had to, you know, digest that information and say, wow, I mean, this will be big for us. So we started with staff having, you know, when I talk about staff, it's our colleagues talking themselves, what does this mean? How are we going to manage? How are we going to address, you know, the programs we are already working with on? And then a decision was taken that they consult, have a transparent conversation with the women and communities and the male leaders that we work with. And a series of dialogues did take place. Some of it, they directed on how they would merge certain programs and the proposals for us to consider. But then that informed the decision of, you know, the country programs on prioritizing what was practical, but having an agreement that we were going to work very hard to see how best to support them to meet the gaps. Because then the federation also, when I talk about the federation, is the, you know, broader ActionAid international team, recognize that it needed a whole of organization approach to be able to see where we could source funding to be able to do the work. But what was sad for me as a feminist, you know, what has been sad is seeing the women again putting up that mother cap and saying, we may need to sacrifice. And that's what women always do in crisis and in normal times. And having lived, you know, run away from some of them from their original homes and coming to what they perceived as safe, and again being told, you're here, but you cannot, you know, get your lives back as you initially thought. So we are in a crisis, really, but we have chosen the methodology of directly consulting, informing them on timely basis the decisions that we are making.
Thank you so much for that, Carol. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add or whether that is the approach. It sounds incredibly sound to me.
Maybe a few others could share how their organizations have approached this. You know, how do you prioritize? How do you make the hard decisions?
Well, Julie, unfortunately, development suffers and the money goes to the more urgent. So I think there's a transition of money going from development to humanitarian and critical. So it's really just stopgap while people readjust to the new reality. But that's what our partners observing, and people are using funds for other projects and reallocating just to keep the lights on.
Yeah, right.
I would agree. There's had to be an immense focusing of efforts and a real assessment of where the need really is the greatest. And that is, to what Carol was saying, that is unfortunate because there is a lot of need, and having to assess great scale need is a difficult thing to do. A lot of this falls on our partners who are out there, and they're on the ground and they're facing it, and as I think Carol spoke to really well, they are the ones that are making these really tough decisions, to be honest, and they're the ones that have to assess what is the greatest need and what can wait or be held, because there's had to be a massive focusing of funds.
Impossible decisions.
Perhaps I could also just jump in from the care side of things. It's, I mean, these are extremely difficult decisions. It's almost, if you think, if you have to remove floors of a hospital, which floor do you remove first? And in terms of, so for example, we're seeing this in Bangladesh at the moment. We have a large, like many organizations have a large operation there. The budget cuts in Bangladesh have been dramatic, specifically in Bangladesh as a country, but specifically in the Cox's Bazar area our colleague spoke about. We're seeing that, so we are actually, the government of Bangladesh and the UN is going through what they're calling a rationalization exercise now, basically reprioritizing what they have to do or what they can do. And organizations such as CARE and others are a part of that process also. For example, so with our programming, we are realigning our funding and our programs to life-saving assistance, basically. So that means other things that are very valuable, very worthwhile, do unfortunately need to drop. And that does create some really difficult decisions and conversations. There's a lot, the camps in Cox's Bazar are prone to landslides, flooding, or consistently every year. So we do a lot of slope stabilization, so reinforcing those slopes to stop landslides. Do you stop that so that next monsoon season there definitely will be landslides in order to keep the maternal health clinic open? Really difficult conversations and decisions to make, and I think ultimately it comes down to that life-saving imperative of the programs.
Thank you. I've just had a response about the hub in the chat. I think if there are no more questions, then we can probably draw the session to an end. Incredibly sobering, but I think all Australians actually, don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but it is important to actually know that this is a crisis and that there are really difficult choices to make, and with that always comes opportunities. So thank you very much again for sharing all the incredible work you're doing.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, no problem.
It's
One
incredible.
last
Everyone,
one last question
congratulations.
before we go. But next week's we're going to have another in this series next week. It'll be looking at sustaining local capacity. So there'll be a different group of projects and probably a different group of people interested to hear about them. So you're all encouraged to participate if you're able. Thanks again for being part of this. Thanks again to Julie and the AIDN network. And as I said earlier, we look forward to being able to share this out. Please do make sure your presentations are shared into Emily if they haven't already been sent, and we'll make sure that these projects, but also other humanitarian needs that have been flagged to us, are shared more widely with the AIDN network. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Matthew, Emily, and
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks so
Thank
much.
Have a good day.
you.